YOLO composing gloves here, and we continue our series into the snap-ins. Today we're looking at the chorus and ensemble. They're very, very similar. I have a little loop here that demonstrates them in two ways, because you can use these things on bass sounds. You can use these things to smooth out sounds. You can use these things to make these gorgeous large pads. So let me really quick just go ahead and play for you this little loop. And both sounds have a chorus. The square wave has an ensemble. Here's what it sounds like. Great. It's beautiful. Lovely thing right here. So actually, all these techniques so far, we've all talked about. We've talked about filter. I am using the note module actually to move the filter around, which is pretty interesting. But we'll talk more about the patches after we cover the snap-ins. So let's go ahead and load up a phase plant. And we'll load up an analog oscillator. We'll just leave it just like that. And, you know, that's what we have. Let's load up a chorus on this one and an ensemble on this one. And now let's go ahead and take a look at these things. So these are very, very similar. The ensemble is sort of made, the idea with the ensemble is you cannot get the metallic kinds of sounds you could get out of a chorus typically, or that would come out of a chorus. What do you mean by metallic sounds? Well, this won't be particularly metallic sounding. It really depends on the material you're giving it. But if you bring up the depth, bring up the rate, and bring down the delay, you get some pretty crazy sounding stuff. That's simply impossible with the ensemble. The ensemble was made with the idea of creating these large, lush scenarios. So let's go over the chorus. Now, both of these, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the chorus. We actually build one and talk about the processing and what actually officially goes on in a standard chorus effect in the DSP series. We actually build one in Reactor, like everything, the delay lines, the whole bit. So if you want to know more about like how they technically work, we're going to talk more about why you would grab one and what they're used for. But basically, a chorus just clones your audio signal and detunes it. And the ensemble does the same thing. It just can't do it as fast. You see there's no rate control over here. And they also give you some motion options and this cool visual on it, like an XY plane. So there's some pretty cool things going on here. But of course, because of this, what you can do is you can use it on like a bass sound to smooth things out. Because high frequencies, those are such small wave. They have a very small waveform, where I mean like short. So like 20 hertz is like 52 feet or something. But if you go up into like 10K, you're down in the centimeters, the inches, somewhere around there. You're getting real small. You get into the millimeters real quick. So the chorus can really help smooth out high-end stuff. It can also create interesting phase cancellation in the low end. So if I were to just turn this on, now we have a delay setting. I'm going to leave it as slow as it can go right now. We'll talk about that one in a second because there's actually a kind of a cool thing you can do with it. We're going to bring our depth down. We're going to bring our rate down. We'll bring our depth, right around there. So basically what we're saying is take this input, this saw wave, and apply the effect immediately. There's no delay. So if I press a note, that's what it sounds like. If I actually put a delay, it only goes up to 100 milliseconds, which is kind of interesting. But you can hear it clearly turn on. That's what that click sound, or not click, but that's what that sound is of it coming on. Now we have our depth. This is just like how much it's allowed to cause this pitch variation. If we have a high rate, this is how fast that pitch modulation happens. This is basically an LFO. We see we're at 0.05 hertz, so very slow, up to 10 hertz. So you can hear those kinds of things. So let's say that we've got a bass sound. And we want to smooth it out a bit. Let's toss a distortion in here and turn this off. Drive it really hard. And now we hear that we have this high-end sort of middle kind of thing up in the higher area of the spectrum. Let me open up a spectrogram. Let's toss open a signal Analyzer would be wonderful, please. We'll go to spectrum. This stuff right here. We want to move this stuff around because right now it is just a little bright and it's just sitting there static. This could be something that's really good, but let's just say for the sake of argument that this is something we want to move around. So let's go ahead, let's turn on the chorus, and we're going to leave the delay down for the moment. We're going to turn our depth up, and this is just going to cause each of these little waves to sort of move around. Well, not each of them, because technically it's influencing the entire waveform, so it's a little more complicated. But you can imagine it as we're just pushing them around. And we'll make the rate not too crazy, because as you heard, a fast rate can be really, really audible. Our spread is stereo spread, so we're going to leave that where it is. And we have taps. This is just how many delays it creates. So right now we're on 2, but we can make 3, and away we go. And we have our mix, which we're going to leave at 100%. And we see this looks a lot more uniform. It also sounds a lot more spread out versus if we had this off. We have that very clear shape right there. Now, eventually you get good at just hearing these shapes and you decide whether or not you really want to mess with it. But each one has its own flavor to it. So, for example, we have unison we've already talked about. But the difference between unison and chorus is a unison additively generates these detuned voices. So this one's like taking the voice, cloning it, and then it's actually moving samples back and forth. We'll talk more about that and when we get to the delay knob. But the unison does this just additively. So if we go down to 2 like this, we get a very different flavor. This one's really useful because it exists in the generator section. One day, I hope to be able to move effects into the middle of the generators, like arbitrarily. It would be amazing. It would be glorious. But right now, it's not possible. So we're going to go over here to the chorus, and that's just the difference. So you're going to want to get familiar with each one and sort of their effects. And keep in mind, on this one, I had this spread way down. So if we bring our spread up, and then we come over here and turn it on, and the detune would be a combination of delay and rate. And we can get a very similar effect. Now I want to show you something kind of cool. Let's take our distortion and turn that off. And let's bring on an LFO and talk about this delay knob right here because it's pretty handy. So the rate moves around, and we saw that the delay just delays the processing. But because the chorus works by moving samples around an LFO, if you go and watch that DSP series in Reactor where we build one, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And I compare it to a guy who throws a baseball with a string attached to it. I know it sounds like, what the heck are you talking about? But if you go check it out, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to pull that into effect here. So I'm going to attach this LFO to the delay. And what it's going to do is basically this rate's going to be shifting the samples back and forth to make the detune. And then we're going to be delaying that in real time. And as a result, we're going to basically have the effect of modulating an LFO. We could get a similar effect just by running an LFO into another LFO, by modulating an LFO with an LFO and then sending that somewhere. But that's just an interesting consequence of this delay knob. And we can run this thing up to 50. So we can get some pretty unusual modulations. Now, you have audio rate modulation, but this is one way of drilling your modulation up. You're going to probably run into aliasing, though. I haven't experimented heavily with this, but you'll probably hit an aliasing roof pretty quick because these were not made to deal with that. But anyways, there's some ideas for you and something that you can get out of the course that you might not have thought of. Now, we also have the ensemble, and the ensemble is made to just go up to very high voice counts. And you see how we get a much more clean, smooth sound. Now, if we're going to make a pad sound, I recommend heavily turn your attack up a little. And the attack actually, that would be material dependent. But your release will create a sense of space because notes will ring out over each other, making it sound spacious without reverb, so there's less mud. And I mean, there we go. We're cooking already. We could go all the way up to 16 on this. Now, we also have a detune, a spread, and if we move it, we can actually visually see them get closer or further apart. We also have a mix. Now, on the motion, This just controls where these things move. This could be pretty fun if you bring this down to 2. Run something like, let's bring these down. So let's play some bass notes. And let's go ahead and drive this into a distortion. And what we're going to do is leave our spread where it's at. And we could do things like, oh, let's have it just do random motion. And you can get just different styles of distortion coming out of it. Like if we go symmetric, it's a lot more predictable. And if we go to sine, that's just a sine wave. Arguably the most predictable. And then randoms, you know, just like random things coming out. So this can sometimes be an interesting process if you're into sort of things just sort of happening and you don't want to use the random module down here. So it can double as like, it could be a 2-edged thing, can be something to occur to you while you're working. But anyway, there's some examples. Let's look at these patches a little bit closer now. So we're going to talk about some of the previous techniques we've used as well. So this is a square wave. I'm just using the dispersed square setting, and it's being modulated by an LFO. Bring it up. And there are a chorus and an ensemble running into each other. Here, it doesn't matter too much how many taps we use because the taps are being, there's 3, but we're adding 16 more voices. So if there was a process in the middle, and in the latest version of Phase Plant, this literally came out today, you can hold an Alt, and you can actually, like, look at that. You can add things so easy in the middle now. It's a small thing, but it's a cool thing, man. So we could add like a distortion in the middle, and this would become more important. But right now, as it stands, it's not going, we don't want to do that. So these things, this basically just serves to make this even more washy. And we heard that we don't have control over rating things here. So this is one reason why we could put a chorus first. Now, I haven't actually tested CPU between the chorus and the unison. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if the chorus is more CPU efficient in the ensemble, because look at how hard we could drive that up to 16 voices. And we get a little CPU hit, but like we're doing 16 voices. So, of course, we're going to get something like that. And it's on poly mode. That's a good point. So I have a filter here, and this filter is jumping around according to a note modulation. So I created a filter shape with a resonance that I liked. And I want this filter to follow the note and make sure that it sounds the same like as I play around the spectrum. So this is called key tracking. And we can do that in here by just taking a note modulator and just setting it up to move the cutoff. So I have it modulating the cutoff. And now if I have poly off, what'll happen is as I play notes, the cutoff, the note modulator will try and snap the cutoff to the value that it needs to be at. And so we can get sort of a gating effect. We get all these, the envelopes fight each other for control over where this should be. I don't want that, so I turned poly on. Now they each get their own filter to move around, and so it's no longer an issue. We covered this too in an earlier video, so this one should not be a shocker. There's like a whole video dedicated to that kind of a problem. Now, the final thing here is a slice EQ, and it's just a regular EQ. So I'm using it just for tonal shaping. It was an experiment at the time. It really doesn't do that much because I'm not playing any low stuff anyways. But it was just sort of a mixing move inside of a synth, which is a little unheard of. But that was the motivation for it. And that's it. That's all there is to that patch. The second patch is a bass sound. And it's being modulated with an envelope controlling the cutoff. We have a chorus on here with a very low rate setting, a pretty low depth. Depth, honestly, could even be lower, but I dialed it into where I wanted it. And we have a delay that just, I think this is just the default. This delay is not something I think you'll touch that often, unless you're doing one of those things that I was just mentioning. Can cause interesting effects if you have like a really large chain. And then into a distortion. So nothing too crazy here. It's a very basic patch. Now, you notice poly's not on this one. The reason is it makes sense with the way I'm writing. Because what ends up happening is the filter comes down, but it still lets like the low stuff through. And so on my bass sound, if we just go ahead and solo this, we have 2 notes, and then a note triggers, and so it's overlapping. So it's sent a trigger, the filter's going to clamp down, it's going to try and play this note, but it can't do the same filter attack because this note's overlapping, and this causes this one to not trigger, and it creates just a smooth do thing, and then it re-triggers right here. And I really like the effect that it had, so I kept it. So, you don't always need to turn on poly. It can be useful for other things. And that's it. Those are the patches. There's several reasons why you might grab them, some explanations and techniques that you might consider. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.